Imagine a place so remote, so punishingly hot and dry, that merely existing there is an act of defiance. Now imagine, in that very crucible, an entire mountainside hollowed out, not by nature, but by centuries of human will. Not for shelter, not for riches, but for something far stranger. A massive, sprawling archive of pure thought. The Bezeklik Thousand Buddha Caves. What strikes you, upon first encountering them, isn't just the sheer scale, but the almost surgical precision of the damage. We're not talking about the erosion of millennia here. We're talking about faces meticulously scraped away, limbs systematically removed from frescoes, entire central figures excised, leaving behind ghostly, negative spaces. It's like staring at a hard drive that's had specific sectors not just corrupted, but deliberately overwritten. And the question that claws at you is, why?
The phenomenon you describe at Bezeklik is indeed a compelling enigma. Located in the Murtak Valley on the western cliffs of the Flaming Mountains in the Turpin Depression, these caves were active from the 6th through the 14th centuries. The environment itself is extreme. Temperatures routinely exceed 40 degrees Celsius in summer, and winter brings frigid cold. Yet over 77 rock-cut caves, many adorned with thousands of square meters of vibrant murals, were excavated here. Our analysis of the damage patterns indicates a multi-phase process. Early destruction suggests iconoclasm, likely during the Islamization of the region in the 14th century, focusing on specific deities or human forms deemed antithetical to monotheistic principles. However, later interventions, some occurring well into the early 20th century, exhibit a different character. These removals, particularly by European expeditions, were primarily for collection and preservation in museums, ironically furthering the physical fragmentation of the site. But it's the methodical, almost ritualistic defacement you reference that continues to puzzle researchers. It transcends simple religious conversion. It suggests an attempt to erase not just images, but narratives, power structures, perhaps even specific protocols of belief.
Protocols. That's a fascinating choice of word for a place that, on the surface, looks like a series of religious sanctuaries. But when you look closer at the sheer number of texts that were stored, copied, translated, the sheer intellectual throughput, it starts to make sense. This wasn't just a place of worship. It was a node, a processing unit for spiritual data, isolated yet deeply connected to a global network via the Silk Road. How did such a sophisticated system even function in this extremity?
The term protocol is apt because the Buddhist monastic system was, in many ways, an early form of distributed computing. Bezeklik wasn't merely a repository. It was a center for active knowledge generation and transmission. Monks, often polyglots, arrived from across the Buddhist world, India, Persia, Gandhara, China, bringing sutras, commentaries, and ritual guides. These texts, written on palm leaves, birch bark, or paper, were meticulously copied, translated, and illustrated within these caves. The murals themselves served as a visual operating system, encoding complex Mahayana and Vajrayana doctrines, meditative states, and cosmic schematics. They were mnemonic devices, teaching aids, and devotional focal points all at once. The isolation was, paradoxically, a feature, not a bug. It fostered intense, uninterrupted intellectual and spiritual work, shielded from the constant flux of urban centers. Sustenance was derived from oasis agriculture and extensive trade along the Silk Road, which brought not only goods but also patrons and new ideas. The Uyghur kingdom of Kocho, which presided over the region for centuries, provided crucial patronage, viewing these monastic complexes as vital cultural and political assets. They understood the strategic value of intellectual capital.
That's where it gets unsettling. If this was a robust, politically supported data center for spiritual thought, why such a profound, almost total shutdown? The standard explanation of gradual decline and religious conversion feels insufficient when you see the methodical, almost vengeful nature of the erasure. It wasn't just abandonment. It was a deliberate act of historical disenfranchisement. The damage isn't just to the art. It's to the very concept of the site's original purpose. It feels less like a natural evolution and more like a targeted purge. What specifically was so dangerous about this particular protocol that it needed to be wiped clean from the narrative?
Your observation regarding the nature of the erasure is crucial. While the arrival of Islam in the region from the 14th century onwards undoubtedly contributed to the decline and eventual abandonment of Buddhist sites, the extent and specificity of the damage at Bezeklik suggests something more than passive neglect or even simple iconoclasm. Consider the meticulous defacement of facial features, particularly eyes. In Buddhist cosmology, the eyes of a Buddha are conduits of enlightenment, perception, and compassion. To remove them is not merely to deface an idol, it is to symbolically sever its connection to the phenomenal world, to blind its data input. Furthermore, the erasure of donor figures, often depicted in specific ethnic costumes, could be interpreted as an attempt to delete the historical patronage and the multi-ethnic identities associated with the site. The Uyghur patrons, who had supported Buddhism for centuries, converted to Islam, shifting their cultural allegiance. This wasn't just a change in religion, it was a fundamental paradigm shift in state identity and cultural memory. Erasing the visual records of the previous faith, especially one so deeply embedded in the intellectual and political landscape, became a mechanism for establishing a new social order. The danger wasn't necessarily in the specific doctrines themselves, but in their continued symbolic power, their ability to evoke a prior, now superseded, cultural hegemony. It was a deplatforming of the past.
A deplatforming, that's chilling. It implies a conscious, almost bureaucratic decision to remove access to entire spiritual operating systems. But beyond the political and religious shifts, were there any internal bugs or vulnerabilities in the protocol itself that might have contributed to its vulnerability? Given its isolation, how did it truly integrate new patches or updates from the broader Buddhist network? Or did its very remoteness make it brittle?
The isolation of Bezeklik, while fostering focused intellectual work, also introduced a degree of vulnerability. While it was a hub on the Silk Road, it was not as central as other major monastic centers like Dunhuang. This meant that while new ideas arrived, the speed of integration for patches or updates to doctrine or practice might have been slower or more localized, creating distinct regional interpretations. The murals at Bezeklik, for instance, display a unique blend of Iranian, Indian, and Chinese artistic influences, indicating a syncretic development. However, this unique synthesis also meant it could diverge from mainstream Buddhist orthodoxy developing elsewhere, potentially making it a target during periods of doctrinal purification or when new, more universal interpretations gained ascendancy. Imagine a highly specialized, localized software, robust within its niche, but vulnerable to a system-wide overhaul. The site's dependence on political patronage also represented a significant vulnerability. When the Uyghur rulers shifted their allegiance, the primary source of resources, protection, and political validation vanished. This left the physical infrastructure and its intellectual servers exposed. It's not unlike an open source project losing its primary maintainers and funding. The code might persist, but its active development and dissemination cease. The desert environment, though offering physical protection against immediate human intrusion, also posed a constant threat of natural degradation, forcing continuous maintenance, which became impossible without patronage. The sand, the extreme temperatures, the very air constantly chipped away at the hardware. Without constant human intervention, the system was doomed to slow, inevitable entropy.
So, the desert itself was a silent, insidious, corrupting force. And the loss of the central admin, the patronage, left the entire data center to rot. But it's the intentional overwriting that keeps gnawing at me. What about the human element during this transition? Were there monks who resisted? Were there attempts to back up this knowledge, to migrate the data elsewhere before the erasure truly took hold? Or was the transition so swift and absolute that there was no time to save the spiritual archives?
That's a profound question, and unfortunately the historical record from that specific period is largely silent on individual acts of resistance or comprehensive data migration. The Islamization of the region was not an instantaneous event, but a process spanning centuries. During this period, some monastic communities would have converted, others might have migrated to areas still under Buddhist influence, such as parts of China or Tibet. We do see evidence of textual fragments, individual manuscripts, being carried away and rediscovered in later caches, such as those found at Dunhuang. These can be seen as small-scale data backups or migrations, often undertaken by individual monks or scholarly groups. However, a systemic, organized transfer of the entire intellectual architecture of Bezeklik, the murals, the libraries, the ritual practices, appears not to have occurred. The scale was too immense, and the political will to destroy outweighed any organized effort to preserve. Imagine attempting to move an entire data center, not just the hard drives, but the physical infrastructure, the cooling systems, the very building itself in an age without modern logistics, under hostile political conditions. It was a logistical impossibility. The gradual decline of patronage would have starved the side of resources, making proactive preservation efforts unfeasible long before the final destructive acts. The burning of libraries, a common feature in cultural shifts, would have irrevocably deleted vast swathes of textual data. The destruction was less about a single, decisive attack and more about a protracted systemic dismemberment, a slow unplugging of a complex system until only spectral echoes remained. What we see now are the ghosts of a network, the empty sockets where the data once resided, hinting at the vast, complex information it once processed.
Spectral echoes, empty sockets, that's precisely the feeling. You walk through these caves and you're not just looking at defaced art, you're looking at a deliberate act of memory suppression on a monumental scale. This wasn't just a change in religion. It was a rewiring of an entire culture's collective consciousness. And the lingering question, the one that stays with you, is what precisely was lost? What unique insights, what specific protocols for understanding the universe were deleted from the historical record simply because a new operating system was installed? The sand continues to blow, the heat beats down, and in that silence, you can almost feel the ghost of 1,000 Buddhas or 1,000 algorithms waiting to be recovered. But you know they never will be. That's the real horror here, isn't it? The sheer, irretrievable loss of something we can barely even comprehend, deliberately erased and left to bake in the desert sun.